Hello, everyone. My name is Roderick Coleman, and I am the owner of this channel, Unapologetically Foundational Black Americans. And I'm not new to YouTube. I have a channel which is called um, Diaspora Kicking the Bobo. And what that channel is, it's about me traveling through to Africa, to the Caribbeans, on my vacations, I log it. And some of the things that I'm doing basically, outside of this country. But this channel is basically uh, just doing things in reference to foundational Black Americans. I consider myself a foundational Black American, and I'm proud to be a foundational Black American. You know, I've been seeing videos of different people insulting foundational Black Americans, calling us racist, even some foundational Black Americans. They may not think that they're foundational Black Americans, but they are. One of the things that I grew up in was, being my age, back in the early, far as I can remember, back in the late 60s, 70s, and early 80s, we were being called colored. And after being called colored, we were called black. We went from colored to black. And during that time period, James Brown came out with a song that said, "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud." And we would all be all in the street saying, "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud." And we went by that term. Then there was a young minister who basically was Martin Luther King's assistant, who deemed himself a civil rights leader, who deemed himself a black leader, but Black Americans never had a leader. Martin Luther King was a civil rights leader, but he wasn't a total leader of all the black people. Malcolm X was somewhat of a civil rights leader, but that was over the Muslims. But even he had a boss who was called Elijah Muhammad. But, Jesse Jackson died sometimes last week. He coined that phrase, African Americans. There are a lot of people that didn't like that, being called African American. Some people, you say, "Are you African American?" They say, "No, I'm not African. I don't know anything about Africa. I was born in Detroit." Somebody else will say, "I was born in Chicago. I was born in Alabama." And they were very proud of where they was born. Now, when you look at foundational Black Americans, you got to understand that the term foundational Black American basically existed before the name foundational Black Americans. I always considered myself a foundational Black American. I just didn't have that term. And one of the things that we must remember is that foundational Black American refers to the lineage-based identity describing Black Americans whose ancestors were enslaved in the United States and who built the country through forced labor, and survival and cultural development, and whose descendants remain in the United States throughout this day. We've survived through Jim Crow, segregation, and the civil rights era. That's what we did. Nobody else can claim that lineage but foundational Black Americans. I'm proud to be a foundational Black American. We have to understand that in general terms, foundational Black Americans are descendants of the U.S. chattel slavery and not voluntary immigrants. We are not voluntary immigrants. We were brought here by force. You see, the person who basically came up with the concept and the ideology of Black Americans is Dr. Claude Anderson. He came up with the lineage-based Black American identity. The distinction between descendants of U.S. slavery and later black immigrants. You know, he came up with that concept, you know, and so the term being named foundational black American literally came from Tariq Nasheed since 2019. Even though he came up with the term, of it, and it sounds good. I like being called foundational black American. Now, does that mean because he came up with the term foundational black American, does that mean that he is our leader? No, it doesn't. Just like Jesse Jackson came up basically with African American. You know what I'm saying? He came up with African American. That did not make him my leader. You know, just like Tariq, he's not our leader. Now, he has a program which I like, you know. I like his program. I listen to it all the time, you know. He roasts basically people who try to roast us and try to put out information on us that is not true. And one of the reasons why I'm starting this channel is because people are trying to say that we are racist. Look, those of us who are foundational black Americans, we don't hate anybody. You know, we just want to delineate because too many people have been saying things about us that's not true. They're trying to take on our culture, which, you know, they're trying to do every day. I had one guy who was on a program, I guess he was on his award show. He said immigrants, you know, basically built this country. No, they did not build this country. Foundational black Americans built this country. Immigrants really didn't start coming into this country until after the civil rights movement, at least black Americans. Now, don't get me wrong. Now, there have been some Caribbeans who have done things in the movement, which we very much so appreciate, like Shirley Chisholm, you know, Halle Berry Fonte, Sidney Poitier, all these guys. But the foundation of what we did for this country had already been started, and they cannot take credit for that, but they would like to take credit for it. You know, they try to say we don't have culture, which is not true. Our culture transcends America. It's all over the world. Everybody wants to be like us, you know? And I can tell you that they're not like us. Nowhere near like us. Everybody likes our swag. Everybody wants to do things in reference to what African Americans do. You know, at one point, you know, I had no idea that Africans and Caribbean felt like they did about us. You know, I make friends and go about my business and, you know, and say, hey, y'all like us. Y'all should believe the same thing we believe in, you know, and want the same thing we want politically. But they never did. And it was they were in the closet about it until we figured it out. Now we figured it out. These young people nowadays, you know, they're not going to take the stuff that we took. And we were too forgiving. These young people, like Tariq, like these other young men and young women, they're not as forgiving. And that's good. That is good. You know, we should go on about our business and delineate to prove a point that we do not need you. I remember I was in a group session with some of my clients, and an immigrant said to me that we should be thankful because you all need us. And I said, nope, we don't need you. We never needed you. You all need us. But that's not fair. That's not right. You all need us to accomplish what you need to accomplish. I said, we never needed you to accomplish what we need to accomplish because we have accomplished everything without you. You wouldn't be here if it wasn't for us. You wasn't here when they were, you know, tying our legs up to one truck and then arms to another truck and then speed off and tear our limbs off. You wasn't here when they was hanging us up in trees, castrating us, and then burning the body and letting their children see it. You wasn't here. We fought through all that. We died through all that. And being born in the 60s, I remember a lot of that stuff. I remember when Martin Luther King got killed. I remember when Malcolm X got killed. I remember when Robert F. Kennedy got shot. I remember all that stuff. I remember the 70s, the riots. I remember Stokely Carmichael. I remember the Black Panthers. I lived through all of that. I experienced all of that. And guess what? There were no immigrants in sight. There were no Mexicans in sight. There were no Hispanic people in sight. There were no Asians in sight. There were no Indians in sight. We did all of that by ourselves. We formed the foundation by ourselves. But everybody wants to take credit for it. They want to take away our lineage. They want to take away how we feel, how we should feel about what's going on in this country. But I can tell you this right here, that being a foundational Black American is more than what people think it is. It's pride. It's love of one's lineage and one's country. Because our blood is in this country. There are people who say, well, I want to lead a country. Well, if you want to lead a country, that's up to you. I understand why you want to, but we're not fleers. We stay, we fight. You know, I won't allow them to take our country. Because here's the thing. Don't you know that foundational Black Americans been here before slavery? A lot of us been here before slavery. And that's another story that I'm going to be talking about. You know, I have traced my lineage back to 1779 here in America. Now I got to get to professionals to go further than that, because before that, basically, we didn't have last names. So be proud of who you are, and don't allow fleers to come here and take over and say what they want to say by putting you down, because the way they believe, things that they believe will shock you. You just never ask them, because you assume that they believe the same thing you believe and that they look like you. So you think that they're okay. But the things that they believe is horrible. But basically, that's what this channel is going to be about. You know, I'm going to be coming up with things, you know, letting you know what's going on and how we should feel, you know, especially the older generation. The younger generation is coming out fighting. They coming out with fire, man. They ain't playing no joke. So I believe and I know that when we leave our lineage to them, it's in good hands. So until the next time, the next video, hey, God bless. And, you know, we on track. Thanks.